Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I am your host. Really excited about this one. This is my episode. Last time we got to talk about receivers, which are, Tyler's becoming a bit more of a trench guy, but wide receiver definitely is Alex's favorite episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the offensive tackles, the hog mollies. So, really excited about that. Thank you for joining us, and joining me to talk about these offensive tackles are my guys, Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you, man. How are you doing?
Doing good. Tried to request my PTO for this episode, but the paperwork didn't go through. So here we are. We're gonna talk and rank at the top 10 tackles, and I know Steven will talk a lot more than me on this one, but I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm excited as well because I feel like Alex will be able to be a little bit more objective than I am. There are certain takes that I'm going to be very passionate about in terms of draft Twitter. So I don't know if Alex is as in tune there as I was. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. Tyler is here as well. Tyler, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well, and you're right. The more I get older and the fatter I get, the more into offensive linemen I get. I really do like watching trench film. It's a lot of fun. They're typically always involved. So can't wait to discuss this. Steven, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. It's been a crazy week at work, but had to scramble and get these offensive tackles ranked, and I'm excited to talk about them. So before we do, I just want to give everyone a PSA. Like, let's calm down a little bit, okay? There's 3 weeks until free agency. Just because a certain writer from a certain company who shall not be named says that the Chargers are not going to be aggressive doesn't really mean anything. So before you lose your minds about free agency, there's still 3 weeks left. A lot can change. A lot is going to change. So don't freak out just yet. You can freak out in 3 weeks from now. But right now, just take a deep breath.
I have no comments about that company. I don't know what you're referring to. They're not being sued right now or anything, so we're not going to talk about.
Yeah, I bet that happened on Chargers Twitter today. Wouldn't know. Don't know.
All I'm saying is just calm down. We still got a lot of time. All right, let's dive right in. I'm really excited about this one. We'll talk about our draft offensive tackle rankings. Obviously, the Chargers have a big need at right tackle. Left tackle, not so much, thankfully. Thankfully, this year we don't have to talk about both tackles. So, Tyler, before we jump into our specific rankings, what are your thoughts in general about this tackle class?
Well, there's 3 really good tackles and then a massive cliff. And I feel like last year there was just this nice little tailoring off as you went. That's why so many fans were like, hey, we can get a guy in the second round at offensive tackle. So let's take a wide receiver at 13. This year, even the guys that are going to be there at 49, I'm not super comfortable with. So I would love for them to take a guy in free agency, so this isn't a problem. It's not a terrible group. Like there's some depth, and there's some guys that we'll talk about that kind of fit like 5 through 10 that I like. It's just like I don't love them, and I think I liked last year's class a lot more.
Yeah, last year's class was definitely more top heavy, or this year's class is more top heavy, I should say. I feel like the amount and volume of the second tier is probably a little bit better. I feel like last year, you had Darisaw, you had Sam Cosmi, at least for me, Alex Leatherwood for whatever that's worth. And then after that, it was kind of a big drop off. I think this year you have the big drop off, and then you have really, I think, like 8 or 9 tackles that have a legitimate argument for being in that second tier.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll dive into a little bit of that. But Alex, your general thoughts on this group as you were preparing for this episode today?
Yeah, I generally agree with what Tyler said. I mean, you kind of have Neil, Ekwonu, and Cross at the top. Probably 3 guys the Chargers don't really have any chance to get. And then you're kind of taking flyers on guys if you're looking at the 17th pick, right? Some people have talked about like Trevor Penning at 17. Some people have talked about, other tackles potentially you could just like fit in there as like, well, let's get that position. But in the first round, to me, it feels kind of reachy. And I just don't feel like, unlike last year where you could get, Slater at 13, or you could get Sewell a little bit higher, or even Darisaw, Jenkins, guys that were still on the board later. That I just don't think that's the case this year to get kind of like a plug and play guy that can just go in kind of on day one and ball out. And so to me, that's the reality with this tackle class. So I think you're drafting a guy that is probably not going to start from day one. I think you probably have to solve that in free agency, solve that in some other way, and then you're probably drafting a tackle or guards and centers who we'll talk about later, and then try to hope that you can kind of develop those guys like that. That's been their philosophy, and I think it's even more their philosophy this year in a draft that has much less top heavy talent and much worse bottom half talent.
Yeah, it really is going to be interesting. I feel like, Daniel Popper in his free agency article seemed to indicate that solving the right tackle position would be a draft problem. And I think that's probably reaching, like, if you're sitting there at 17 and you're taking one of these smaller school guys, which we'll talk about, excuse me. I just don't know how I feel about that. And so he also seemed to indicate that, Storm Norton, a restricted free agency, will have a chance to challenge for that position. I don't really know how much I buy that at this point. Of course, we'll see in a few weeks if they tender him or not. But I think my approach in terms of solving the right tackle really is, go sign a veteran free agent, whether that's, Dennis Kelly or, Popper floated the idea of a Bobby Massey signing, which I would kind of hate, but I think Morgan Moses probably is a little too expensive for them given the other needs. But go sign a veteran that can hold the fort for a year, draft one in the third, fourth rounds, and kind of see where you're at next year. Hopefully, Hymus or the rookie or the free agent class gives you kind of a better answer. But I think this year, where the Chargers are drafting, I just think I think it's kind of you're aiming for a bridge starter at this point. And I we'll dive in a little bit, like I said, but I just don't feel great about the possible solutions for the future coming out of this season.
Yeah, I could see right tackle being the solution the draft being the solution to right tackle. I just don't want to go into it without one. At this point last year, the Chargers did go into the draft though with just Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins as their left tackle options, right?
Yeah.
So I guess it is possible. And they actually haven't cut Balaga yet. I don't think they're going to keep him. But I mean, they could go with Norton and Pipkins again as into the draft and just see, hey, if we can find a guy, we can find a guy. If not, it's going to be one of those two.
Oh, man,
yeah. Well, I would say the draft can be a solution for them at right tackle, but only because their right tackles right now are Norton and Pipkins. It can be a solution because those are the guys. But yeah.
Yeah, I expect them to add somebody somehow. I can't imagine that they'll hand Norton the spot right away, and then even then, like you need to have more bodies. So I don't know. I'm still hopeful that they add a veteran, draft kind of a Hymus version of right tackle this year. Obviously not in the 5th round, but yeah. So that being said, we're going to dive into these rankings. We're going to do it a little bit different in terms of formatting our episode. We're going to do 10 through 7, and then 6 through 4, and then 3 through 1. I feel like that's kind of a better split. And I get to go first today. So really excited about this one. That being said, number 10 for me is Nicholas Petit Frere. I honestly don't know how to say that last name. The offensive tackle out of Ohio State. Listed at 6'5", 315 pounds. He is a true junior. At number 9, I have Max Mitchell, the offensive tackle / guard. We'll see kind of how that one pans out. But he's coming out of Louisiana Lafayette. He's 6'5" 3/4 and a very light 299 pounds. Darian Kennard is number 8 for me. Offensive tackle out of Kentucky, possible guard convert. We'll talk about that in a second. He's listed at 6'4" 3/4 and 324 pounds. And then Daniel Faalele, the massive human being out of Australia and Minnesota University, is 7 for me. He's listed at a whopping 6'8" 1/8 and 387 pounds, according to the Senior Bowl. So that's my 10 through 7. I think for the Chargers' sake, I think Max Mitchell is really the one to keep an eye on and kind of monitor that progress. So he was a 3-year starter for the University of Louisiana. He started at 3 different spots, including both tackle spots and right guard. So there's a lot of versatility there. We know that the Chargers kind of have valued that trait over the last really the last season under Brandon Staley. I feel like they're kind of trying to train Brendan Hymas to be that kind of player. We'll see how that development goes. But Max Mitchell's versatility really was on display at the Senior Bowl as well, where he took reps at all 4 spots except for center. So that's a trait I really like just his high football IQ, being able to pick up stunts, being flexible on the line, and really demonstrating, a functional athleticism, at those positions. So I think he can hold up really well at any of those positions. If he's going to play, starter minutes in the NFL, he's of course going to have to bulk up. You cannot play offensive line in the NFL at 299 pounds. So that's kind of why I have him down here. But really like his athleticism, really like his fluidity and explosiveness out of his stance. I think he's going to be penciled into a zone blocking, space blocking scheme as opposed to a gap kind of scheme. But I really like what I see from Max Mitchell. I like his competitiveness. Of course, mentioned his versatility. And so I think he would be kind of my choice if I had to right now in terms of round 3 target, somebody that I think could come in and provide some offensive versatility that way, be a bit of a project. Like I said, 299 pounds is not great, but I really like what I see on tape. I really like the techniques that I see. It's just, that frame needs some work, but overall, I'm a big fan of Max Mitchell.
Yeah, me too. I'm a real big Max Mitchell fan. I was going through some of these tackles and I was getting to some non-mover guys. So like Andrew Stuber, who's maybe going to be a guard, or Kellen Deesh, or however you say his name, from Arizona State. But I got to Mitchell, and finally somebody was able to move. And I do think I have a preference for guys that can move. And part of our grading system does favor, second level mobility and whatnot, and obviously footwork. Like you said, though, him being 299, he definitely looks like it. There's a guy later that I'm not going to talk about. That's Spencer Burford. He's a guy that I didn't realize he was 6'3". I'm like, wow, this guy looks really squatty for a guy that's supposed to be about the same height, same weight, but he's 6'3". Whole other thing. But Max Mitchell, I did really like him. Like you said, high IQ guy. I could just tell with the way he picked up stunts, and also just always keeping his head on a swivel and helping out his guard next to him. I love seeing that. But then, the obvious negative is just that he's not that big. I do love like his strike, but sometimes when defenders are, faster to get their hands on him, he just can't anchor down. He just can't win because he's just not that strong yet. So it's not really his thing. Burford is someone who is better at that. But again, the IQ, the fact that he can play anywhere. There was a game where he was the extra tackle, he was the left tackle, he was the right tackle, and he looked very comfortable at all of them. So he's a round 3 target that I would really, really like. And even if I wouldn't take him in round 2, but if for some reason they had traded back in round 2 for whatever reason, I wouldn't mind him there either as much. He's a good player. I like him.
Yeah,
so
I was gonna say just
go ahead, Alex.
On the Mitchell thing. I like quite a bit. His movement's really good, and kind of had the questions of like, well, he played for Louisiana, and now kind of the whole competition thing. But the Senior Bowl is kind of the greatest equalizer of all that. Did great there, and kind of boosted himself really, I think, into like at least the top tier of the day 3 guys. Really great with his movement, like you guys have said, and particularly just like quick feet, like fluid mover when you watch him. And I was really impressed with Tyler, and he posted that whole side hug where you just watch him switching all the time, and I thought that was really impressive between guard and all these spots, jumbo packages, whatever the team needed at any point. And so seeing that kind of versatility for a guy like Max Mitchell, I thought was just really impressive.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his. Like I said, I feel like that utility ability is so valuable, especially for a team like the Chargers that just needs, functional starters. And I think he can definitely be that. I think the other one to kind of note, it's really been a journey for me and Daniel Faalele. It's been really up and down. I think if you just watch his Ohio State tape, really you're looking at like a first round tackle. Like he dominated that team, and Tyreek Smith and all these other edge rushers for Ohio State that have given problems to a lot of different offensive tackles couldn't do anything against Daniel Faalele. Of course, that was the first game of the season. So I think the more that I watched, the more that he kind of leveled off. Of course, that that weight and that size is no joke, right? And that really is kind of my big concern there. He really, I think, probably needs to get to like 370, 375, which is kind of crazy to say out loud. But I think the issue with his size is just that he doesn't have that natural, explosiveness going backwards, right? Like you watch him in run blocking situations and he just goes downhill in a hurry, and he is very explosive going forwards. But when he's asked to deep set against a speed rusher, he really opens up so much because he's so worried about somebody bending and turning the corner. That's where he gets in trouble, and an advanced pass rusher can, of course, counter back inside and then get after the quarterback that way. So he's got some technique issues. I'm a little worried about his frame, but his good is really freaking good. Like he is able to execute, and win in a variety of ways. He can snatch, he can long arm, he can jab. So he can do a lot of different things. And that was kind of surprising to me, considering he's only played football for 4 years in his life. First year of his football career was as a senior at IMG Academy. So there's a lot of untapped potential there, but I can't see him being a fit for the Chargers, given the way that they kind of value the mobility and athleticism, and frankly, that utility that I was talking about. But in terms of just the draft overall, man, like he's such an intriguing player because you look at his good tape and it's dominant. And then, he's got some really bad tape out there too. So that's kind of a potential placement for me. But just somebody that I think is so interesting because we don't really see people's size be effective in the NFL. Orlando Brown it's kind of an outlier. So it's going to be very interesting to see where he lands. If he ends up with the Patriots or the Ravens, I feel good about his future because they have a history of developing those kind of players. I think that fits his skill set, but he's going to be put in a box just because of his size for sure.
Yeah, I just started watching George Karlaftis from Purdue, and one of his first games was one of Daniel Falele's first games. And of course, Karlaftis comes into the league at Purdue as a lanky little freshman. And here's Faalele when he first comes in at 6'9", 400 pounds. And the size difference between an edge and a tackle could not have been different. And Faalele held up pretty well against Karlaftis, so credit to him there. I like him. I have him a little bit higher, and I'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, that Ohio State tape, it's part of the reason that of the perceived like second tier big three, again, up to interpretation, that one Ohio State game was probably the best single game one of those big three had versus like a good opponent. And so there's a lot there too. Like the Senior Bowl was a little bit rough. That first day was so rough. Again, the one-on-ones, it's not built in their favor, but it was tough to see really all those guys, but Faalele in particular, get pushed backwards. And I get some things like him oversetting and him getting beat back inside or whatever, or someone's faster around the edge or something, but I didn't expect him to get pushed back as much as he was. So it's definitely a work in progress. If he's a day one starter, it's just because he's big enough and you can run the ball a lot. The Ravens, I'm sure, would love to run the ball with this guy, but if he went for the Chargers in the second round, I guess he could start day one, but him giving him some time as well to develop, maybe get that weight under control would be good for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think Daniel Faalele is just one of the biggest guys in the draft. Just the sheer size of him is just crazy to watch on tape, and plays like every bit of it. I think the Senior Bowl was kind of that kind of made me hitch on him, just because it's like, okay, well, he's kind of getting beat by like not crazy technique moves either. It was just like, well, this guy just kind of beat him around because he's 6'9", 400, and this guy was faster than him around the edge, right? Yeah. So I think that's sort of the thing going forward where that's something he'll need to work on in the NFL. But I do have him a little bit higher on this list just because of like the potential, right? Also the fact that like he is still young, he hasn't been playing football for very long, right? I think he's pretty recent to the game as well. Obviously coming from Australia, right? Kind of the Mailata experience there in that regard. So I will be interested to see kind of where we all have him on this list. Obviously, Steven's a little lower on him. I imagine me and Tyler are a little higher on him, but I think also what the perception of him will be amongst NFL GMs will be interesting too. Just because all of that size and power is great, but it's like, can you kind of refine the technique a little bit? If he does, then like you could make the argument, like Steven said at points, that he looks like a top 4 tackle in this class.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
difference between like Steven and I, it's not quite the same player, but like I feel like I was a little higher on Darisaw than Steven was. I'm not saying they're even the same player, but kind of bigger guys, a little bit slower guys, not exactly a jump set, quick on your footwork kind of guy. So it kind of reminds me of that. Sorry, Steven.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say, I feel like I really wish that he would have shown up lighter, at the
Yeah, I'm
Senior Bowl.
surprised.
Um, you know, Darian Kennard lost 20 pounds for the Senior Bowl. He was listed at 345 and
Mm-hmm.
showed up at 325 to the Senior Bowl. And so I don't know how much weight Daniel Faalele is going to be able to lose between the Senior Bowl at the end of January to the Combine, which is next week. But like, if he shows up at 387, like he's going to be off several teams' boards just because of
Mhm.
that. Like, I think teams look at somebody like Mekhi Becton, who's kind of struggled with his weight a little bit. Mekhi, I think, is 6'7", so he's a couple inches shorter, I think. But he's going to have to keep that down. Like I said, I feel like his ideal weight would be like 370, because he is so big. But I personally can't see the Chargers taking him. I just don't think he would be a scheme fit because of his athletic limitations. But
Mhm.
we'll see. So let's get to Alex. Alex, we'll do your 10 through 7, and then kind of your standouts there.
Yeah, I'm only gonna really do one standout from 10 to 7 because me and Steven have a very similar 10 through 8. I have Darian Kennard at 10. I have Max Mitchell at 9. I have Nick Petit-Frere from Ohio State at 8. Where I have a bit of a difference here is I have Penn State's Rasheed Walker at 7 in this ranking. I think his story is pretty interesting. Just to little background, he played in 3 different offensive line systems at Penn State and had 2 different offensive line coaches. When people talk about some of his inconsistencies on the field, I think that that's something that could certainly contribute to it. Penn State also runs kind of like a lot of power-based run game. So, obviously his run block is a little bit ahead of his pass blocking, but he kind of peaked a little bit as a pass blocker this year too. I thought he had some interesting moments on tape, particularly his game against Aiden Hutchinson is kind of a fun watch. So he's got a lot of those moments too. Amongst some of those inconsistencies, he's very young as well, and so I just like his ability to kind of be physical and kind of be there sort of in the run game as well. I don't think he's a guy that can start from day one. I don't think there's many of those guys like we've talked about that are really after the top 3, top 4 in this class. But I think if you take a swing on him on day 3, or even maybe later on day 2, it would just kind of be interesting to see what do. Don't think he can start from the beginning though. But he's got like all the tools you kind of wanted to tackle, and you kind of just got to put him in like the right situation. And the Chargers have been developing offensive linemen very well. Well, for the last year under Frank Smith. Prior to that, not so great. But they do have this culture now to be able to develop him. Maybe not like some of the other teams Steven mentioned when it comes to prospects earlier, but I just think there's like the natural talent he has, and then sort of his potential / like skill set. I think that there's kind of a coaching staff that can bring that out of him. So I do have Penn State's Rasheed Walker. Even though he struggled in 2021, I do still think there is something for him kind of at the pro level, and I think a team can get that out of him. So he's kind of my standout because he's really the only one I had different than Steven.
He's at 7 for you?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, for some reason I thought that he was 8. Yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan. There's a couple of things that I do. First off, I will say regarding liking him, Duke Manyweather and Brandon Thorne both pitched him as a guy that you should keep an eye on as a late second, early third guy whose traits you want to gamble on. And I totally would understand that. I just wasn't a huge fan. I was actually I'm not surprised, but I guess I was kind of surprised that Steven was too. Like I thought I was just kind of a curmudgeon, didn't like him sort of thing. Like, and it's just sometimes that happens. But for Steven not like him either, I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's something. There's some weird, if you try to Google his injury, there's something about an undisclosed injury. Duke Manyweather suggested it was a knee, or Brendan Thorne suggested it was some sort of knee, or it's like a bone bruise. That's kind of weird. I don't know much about that. And then, got to bring it up, and this will probably inevitably take him off to Lesko's board if there was ever there. He did steal a bike in 2018 because he was too lazy to walk home. So on campus, he stole someone's bike, and
I don't know if that would take him off his board, man.
I think stealing. You know what? I'm
Like
gonna
for
move him up.
Telesco?
I'm gonna move him up to 6 after creating the steal the bike story. You know what? Does he not put the shopping cart back either? I like a mean streak.
Listen, man, like Telesco, he dealt with Tillery. Listen, the only guy who took a chance on who had character issues was Tillery, and that didn't work out. So you know what? Maybe he's just bikes are drawing the line.
Maybe the problem is that Tillery didn't steal enough bikes, and it didn't really get him to where he needs to be today.
Yeah, should have worked on his bend to steal those bikes. Yeah, it's just like he definitely has, when his hands work, when his punch works, I think they're very good. It's just if the defender's plan is to engage quickly, beat his punch, or attack his hands, like that jump and chop, he runs into problems. And sometimes that hand punch is good. It's how he knocked out Hutchinson, I think, a couple of times, had some wins versus Ojabo. But for the most part, the guys that I watched him play, and granted, it's unfortunate because he does have to face very good pass rushers in his conference, but it just wasn't pretty. So the injury being weird, I'm not going to really knock him for stealing a bike, but like, you're an asshole for doing that. And also, yeah, he got kind of destroyed, unfortunately, by the guys that I watched. Just not my favorite guy. He's actually out of my top 10.
Yeah, he's not in my top 10 either. If he played through a knee injury, though, I'll put knee 2020 back on the list.
Bike theft, you got to put him at number 9 now.
I'll put him back on the list just because if Brandon Thorne and Duke Manyweather say there's something there, I think that obviously carries a lot of weight. Those two are, of course, the gurus of all gurus. I'm wearing the OL Masterminds sweatshirt today for Duke. But if there is something there, I'll go back and watch some 2020 tape and see. But if he's playing through a knee injury, I think that makes sense. I didn't really see a ton of explosiveness out of his stance or in his sets or anything like that. So yeah, he's not in my top 10, but I'll put him back on the list there. Somebody I think that is worth talking about, I've seen him mocked to the Chargers quite a bit, is of course Nick Petit-Frere out of Ohio State. Alex, you have him a little higher than I do. You have him at 8, right? I have him at 10. Tyler, where do you have? Is he on your top 10?
Yeah, I tried so hard to get him off, but I couldn't. He does very good things, but he's number 9 for me, so I'm between you guys.
Okay, he's number 9. So Alex, you're the highest of us on Petit-Frere. What do you like about him?
No, I mean, I just think he's very like technically sound. I think, like Tyler said, it's a thing where you want to like get him off your board, but you kind of can't because he sort of is like that technically sound guy where everything's right with him, even though he's not, he's not a 6'9", 400-pound guy who's like gonna come down field or something like that. I just thought he was very adept with his hands, kind of his striking as well.
Yeah.
Bit of an ability to kind of like get to the second level pretty consistently there too when you watch him on tape. So not necessarily like a sexy pick, but I did have him there kind of for technical reasons. And if, like we talked about a little bit earlier, if you're looking for guys that are closer to being able to start on day one, he's probably one of those from 5 to 10 that has a realistic chance to do it.
Yeah, I think in terms of this, second, third tier, like I think he probably is the most technically advanced right now. He really has some good moments out there, particularly against Penn State. I thought he did pretty well. I know Tyler kind of thinks the opposite there, but I think there is some technical ability there. I'm really curious to see how he tests. And really kind of how he measures up there. And so I think if there's any spot for me that will have some movement, it's that spot, number 10. Just because I'm really waiting to see how he tests more than anybody else on this list for me. Tyler, let's get to your 10 through 7. And then if there's anybody you want to cover there, feel free.
Yeah, it's kind of recycling the same group, unfortunately. So number 10, I do have Max Mitchell. He's a guy that I think could surpass the next couple of guys on this list. I just need to see him gain a little bit more weight, get a little stronger, but I do really, really like him. At number 9, I do have Nicholas Petit-Frere, how the hell you say his last name. you ruined this for me, Steven, because you're like, oh, he gives me Alex Leatherwood vibes, and I was
Yeah.
not a fan of Leatherwood.
Yeah.
And then I go to watch him, and I'm like, oh no, like I kind of see it. Just there's a certain lack of urgency I feel like that I
Yeah.
see that it just has me worried. So, I feel bad this guy's played. He's a good prospect, I think. But like I have some questions that I feel like it's nitpicking, but then the sum of it all has him at 9 for me. At 8, I have Darian Kennard. 7, I'm going to steal this name. It's Abraham Lucas from Washington State. I was not even going to cover him because I didn't even know who he was. And then Steven says, hey, check this guy out. I mean, he's a top 100, whatever player on TDN's board, but I just didn't have time. I found time, and I'm glad that I did. I think I'll let Steven talk about him more, but to me, just the smallest way I can describe how he did, for him to allow 0 sacks and 1 quarterback hit all year and have only 2 pressures against USC and Oregon facing Kayvon Thibodeau and Drake Jackson, to me, I mean, that's a pretty good resume. Like his quarterback got touched once all year because of him. And that's pretty fantastic. I would love to see him be a little bit stronger and anchor down a little bit better for someone who's that big. He has some of those same issues that like a Max Mitchell would. I was surprised because he's 6'7", 319. So maybe it's more of a leverage thing than an anchor weight thing, I suppose. But, he doesn't exactly move guys off the ball, but he's a guy you want in pass protection, clearly. And that's the most valuable thing an offensive tackle can do. And for him to be that good in pass pro against Thibodeau, against Jackson, and allow 1 quarterback hit all year, I think he's a really, really solid prospect. So I have him at 7. And thank you, Steven, for bringing me, towards him.
Yeah, he was a late ad for me. He was not really somebody that I was like super excited about or expecting a ton from. Like he was solid at the Senior Bowl. I didn't think he was like a standout. So he wasn't necessarily somebody that I was like, okay, I got to go watch this guy. Like I got to see what's up. And the film really surprised me. Like you mentioned, Kayvon Thibodeau, Drake Jackson, those were the games that I watched as well. And I think that matters. Like, he's not in the SEC, of course, or the Big Ten where you're facing Aiden Hutchinson and Will Anderson, like all these guys every single week. But the Pac-12 has some really good rushers. And I would throw, Mika Tafua from Utah in there in terms of being a tough cover for him. And, Lucas did well. I think his size doesn't necessarily translate to play strength. So I think that is a bit of a concern for me. So I have him at 6. So it was a really good lead in. And, I think he's not going to be as powerful as Trevor Penning. He's not going to be as athletic as, some of these other guys. He's not going to be Ikem Ekwonu, of course. But I think he's a functional run blocker. I think he fits perfectly for an outside zone scheme like the Chargers want to be. He's got great size. He's got great length. And I think he's just solid. Like he does have some technique issues. I'm a little worried about the anchor as well. But his kind of resume and the way that he played against his best competition really stood out to me. If you watch the Oregon Duck defense, you know that they moved Thibodeau and I forget his first name, Sewell's, the younger Sewell brother. They move them around a ton, and they do a lot of stunts. They do a lot of games. They mix in 4-man fronts. They mix in 3-man fronts. And Abraham Lucas just really handled everything that fit him. It looks like Tyler's having some mic issues, but he's good. So just the way that he performed against his top competition really stood out to me. Like I said, the play strength isn't great. Obviously, playing at Washington State, he didn't get a ton of run blocking reps. But I'm a big fan of him, and in a class where there's just a lot of questions, I know what Abraham Lucas is going to be. I'm very confident that he'll be, an average to above average starter. I feel comfortable with his floor, and I think that matters in this class. So I have him at 6. I have Bernhard Raimann at 5. It was very conflicted with how to rake him and putting a top 5 ranking on Bernhard Raimann because I don't think that he's like a first round talent. But that's where I have him. I have him at 5. Kind of speaks to that cliff that we were talking about. And then I have Trevor Penning at 4. Again, another player that I've gone back and forth on. It kind of speaks to the cliff, but that's my 4 through 6. I have Penning 4, Raimann 5, and Abraham Lucas 6.
Well, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a certain player in this group that's not on another person's list. Care to explain why you're not a fan of this player and why he's not on your list? Somebody else.
Bernard Raymond's not in my top 10. I didn't like him. Like I thought he was late with his hands a lot. I thought Tyler talked about that urgency a while ago, and I felt that was, kind of a thing for him too. You also take into account the level of competitions. Like, I don't know, I'm watching games against IU and Kent State, shout out Antonio Gates. But, I just didn't think that was particularly intriguing. And then we talk about him as prospects. Like, all these guys we're talking about are like 21, 22, 23. He's going to be 20 in his age 26 is when the season starts. And like, that's a concern for me. So like, I get the whole, like, he converted 2 years ago from tight end. And like, this is, he does still have like this theoretical limited ceiling, but I just feel like guys are kind of tapped out at a certain point. I mean, for a guy to be 26, he's gonna be 30 if you draft him in the first round by the end of his rookie contract. I have a lot of reservations about him. But yeah, like I do think there is something to him where, like he does definitely have like impressive strength, particularly I would say strength from legs as well. Like he can definitely push people around, particularly I would say more so I would say in kind of like pass blocking situations a little bit. That was sort of his most impressive attribute to me. But I don't know, like I just had a hard time watching it and being like, yeah, this guy is going to be like your starter for 10 years, because in 10 years he'll be like 85. But that was a problem for me watching Bernard Raimann, and I get why people like him. Not a fan though.
Yeah, I think like the Daniel Jeremiah had the Chargers taking him at 17 in his first round mock draft, and it just like it was a wild process for me, because I'm like, oh, like he's from Austria, like he's barely played any football. He was a former tight end. He was on Feldman's freak list. I'm like, hell yeah, like let's go. This guy is gonna be awesome. And then I'm like, oh shit, he's 25. Like I don't understand the first round hype for a player like this, and I'm on the same page with Alex there. That being said, like I do like his tape a lot. I think he does show good explosiveness. One of the things that he's on Feldman's freaks list for is his 4.60 shuttle time, and that's a really freaking good time. And so I think you see that kind of athleticism on tape. I think he needs some work in terms of the technique for sure. Like Alex was saying, I think the biggest thing there is that he gives up his inside shoulder way too often against rushers, and that leads to some leverage and bend issues. Trevor Penning also has that same issue to a larger extent. And so there are definitely some concerns for me about Bernard Raimann, but I think he is I think he's above average in terms of the athleticism department, in terms of the explosiveness department. And I don't know, like I had to go in there thinking like, okay, like he's not a first rounder. He's not a first rounder. And so I think that speaks to this class more than anything else, but I do like him. If the Chargers traded back in the first round and were able to grab a second round pick, I would be okay in that situation taking a shot on him in the second round. I'm definitely not taking him at 17. I'm definitely not taking him in the first round, but I just think the hype is a little too crazy. Like PFF threw out a Lane Johnson comparison for him, and I was like, hold on, like what are we doing here? So I gave the comparison of Brady Christensen, the BYU offensive tackle, very similar athletic metrics. I think Raymond's a little bit better in that regard. He does hit the 33-inch threshold, and unlike Brady Christensen. So there is some stuff to like with Raimann, and I think we do need to like remind ourselves of that. It's just that the hype right now is way too rich for me.
Yeah, when you mentioned the Lane Johnson comp, it's like, come on, man. Like, what are we doing here?
I know.
He does have good grip strength, and Lane Johnson sure put Chris Rumpf in clamps this past year. But I mean, yeah, he's like what the people like about him, it's all kind of the same. He's a quick learner. He just came here from Northern Austria. Look how good he is now. That's awesome. He's a good athlete. He's got good hands. I think he uses his length pretty well. He's generally pretty solid. And the mistakes that he makes, I just feel like, it's a lack of repetition. You whip on some run block here. You can't pick up this stunt here. And, he had the worst Senior Bowl probably because it was just the most foreign to him. He just wasn't used to anything like that and just wasn't used to playing the position. So he had a really awful Senior Bowl, at least in terms of the one-on-ones, which again, they're not really set up to win those too much, but it was really bad from him. But yeah, the whole 25 thing and the first round hype and the Lane Johnson comp, the hype, the difference between how I feel like a lot of people on social media or like, Daniel Jeremiah feels about him versus how I feel about him just feels like a really big gap. And I just feel like we're accepting that he's 25 and that's totally fine. And or he's going to be 25. And that's really tough. Like he's going to be a year older than Herbert. He's probably a year younger than Derwin James, who got drafted 4 years ago. It's just like, that's just a lot for me. And if he were like, let's say he were like, honestly, like Abraham Lucas and he were 22, then, I could get that because you want to give him a couple of years. But by the time he becomes a good right tackle, even if that's just next year, you're still 26 at that point. He gets his new contract. He's 30. So unless we're playing Whitworth here, it's really tough to mark him any higher. My question for you guys is, if he were 21, would he have, for you, Steven, moved ahead of Penning? And then Alex, for you, would he had made your top 10?
Oh, I think I think he would be in the top 10. I don't know how high, probably in that 10 to 7 range, but yeah, I think he would be in there.
I think he would have a higher grade for me. I don't think he would move ahead of Penning. I think those two are pretty neck and neck right now. But one of you guys can talk about Penning, but I think like just in terms of sheer athleticism and strength, I think Penning has the edge there. And I think Raimann is slightly ahead of Abraham Lucas in that regard as well. Like I'm not necessarily concerned about the play strength for Bernard Raimann as I am for Lucas. So this trio was really tough for me to figure out, and I'm sure some of it will change after the combine. But right now, I think Raimann, like there is a lot to like about Raimann. It's just the age and the hype is really gotten out of hand.
I wish I liked him because my dad's side of the family is from Austria. This should be like the one player I like, but then I have to keep watching the film and being like, you have to remember he's not in the retirement home. You have to remember he's not in the retirement home. And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Alex, let's get to the players that you do like here. So let's get to your 6 through 4.
All right. We will go to number 6. I have Tulsa's Tyler Smith. Number 5, I do have Trevor Penning. And at number 4, I do have Daniel. Steven Summer OT4 makes OT4 on my list. I'll talk about Tyler Smith out of this group because he kind of reminds me of like, well, we'll talk about Ekwonu later, but he's kind of like group of 5 Ekwonu a little bit when I watch him. And I just think he actually, a real comp would kind of be like Tevin Jenkins last year. Like he just plays with like a real mean streak to him. I like just the power he plays with as well. Sometimes his hand placement, I think, gets a little dodgy, and that can get him into trouble in some situations. But I just think the skills kind of tools that he has there are just like too much. And we did just talk about the age thing with Raimann, but he's only 20 years old, one of the youngest players in the class, also, one of the biggest players as well. And I think his anchor is like kind of unquestionable. Like he just has a really good anchor compared to some of the guys on this list in terms of what he can do. So for me, I get what Steven says when he says, he's a bit of a project. Like I don't think either when we talk about guys 5 through 10 on this list that any of them are really capable of starting from day one. But for me, he's kind of the guy from that group that has the most upside, which is for, the purposes of this list, why he landed at 6. I also just think even though he has a stout anchor, like he also just has those quick kind of like nimble feet as well. And for me, that's what I went with Tyler Smith. I do think, he's not a guy that can start from day one, but he was really good against, all sorts of competition, whether it was group of 5 or, some of the other teams Tulsa played. Like he was really solid in my opinion. So kind of in the vein of just being like really technically sound as well as having a lot of upside and a lot of potential.
Yeah, so Tyler Smith didn't make my top 10. I totally see the upside. I totally see the athleticism. He's somebody that I really wish would have stayed in school. Like, I think if he had stayed at Tulsa for another year, obviously reached his peak next year, then we're talking about like a legitimate back end of the first round tackle, in my opinion. I think his technique needs a lot of work. I think his leverage needs a lot of work, but the Ikemi Kwanu light thing, I totally see as a run blocker. He is vicious. He's athletic. I think he, like I said, wish he stayed in school, elevated his stock. Granted, there are some people on Twitter who think that he should be a first rounder anyway. So maybe what do I know? But I think he, in terms of technique, there's a lot of work to be had there.
Unfortunately, I have not watched him. He has a first round talent first name, but I have not watched him.
Very good. Tyler, let's get to your 6 through 4.
Okay, my 6 through 4. Number 6 is Bernard Raimann. We talked about him. Number 5, I do have Daniel Faalele. He is one of my guys in this draft, but I do have to acknowledge the obvious issues. And then number 4 is Trevor Penning from Northern Iowa. This guy is the most bully of the group. And I even though with Ekwonu, I do think Ekwanu's a better finisher. Penning's more of a bully, if that makes sense. And
yeah,
he does check a lot of the boxes you wanted, right? Let's dominate weak competition, that mean streak, all that stuff is you want to see, the athleticism, everything that stands out does. To me, it's just, even though he's my number 4, like I don't feel great about him at 4. There's definitely those pad level issues in him. I was listening to Duke and Brendan Thorne talk about it, and they hit it perfectly. Obviously, Duke says that he goes from straight down to straight up and over exaggerates that hip height and pad level, and I totally see that. And I think that was exacerbated at the Senior Bowl, and I'm just a little worried that his dominance at his level, which is great, I'm worried it won't translate because he'll to the NFL, because so much of the dominance I saw from him, especially when working to the outside, he able to just toss some guy to the ground or whatever. But I think when you go to the NFL and you have these true benders and true balance guys and really, really polished dudes, I don't know if he'll have all of those knockdowns that he did. He won't have that many knockdowns, but I don't know if it'll translate all that well. And then again, each of these guys just has an asterisk, where it's Faalele with its weight, or Raimann, it's the age. Penning, and it's the penalties. Penning gets penalties, and it's 17 penalties or whatever it was in the last season at Northern Iowa. That's just not great. I didn't go through and chart. I wanted to. I wanted to go back and chart where his penalties occurred, but you just can't have 17 of those. And I get that he's going to have that mean streak, and that's great and all. And Duke doesn't seem to think that that's a huge deal. He wants him to keep that going. I don't know. It could strike me as a problem, because if he goes to Baltimore, let's say, and Steven and I already talked about this, like if he goes to Baltimore and he has to face Myles Garrett, like Myles Garrett's not going to put up with that. And I am not going to find out, how Trevor Penning survives that one, because I just don't think that's going to go very well. So, I think he's a talented player, which is good. He dominated his competition, which is good. That's why he made it to 4. But there's still a lot of questions there. And unfortunately, of Penning, Faalele, and Raimann, nobody really stood out to me in a good way at the Senior Bowl. And so it's really hard to really separate those guys. But at the end of the day, Penning did separate and become my first of the second tier.
Yeah, I think he played well at the Senior Bowl, and I think there are parts of his film that are really, really good. You watch his film against Iowa State, for example, and they do the 3-3-5 bullshit that I hate so much. But I think that's legitimately good tape against good competition. The mean streak, I think, is really something that wore on me. Like, he is obsessed with being a bully, and not in the way that like Ryan Jensen is, where like Ryan Jensen draws people into penalties. Trevor Penning commits the penalties, so it's a big problem. There are instances against North Dakota State where they're running right, he's trying to cut off a backside linebacker, and the linebacker kind of beats him to the spot. And instead of just like moving on or like trying to, work his way around there, Penning just shoves the linebacker in the back. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, that play that I'm talking about went for a loss. But if that play pops, you're losing 10 yards because Penning is an asshole and he's also a dumbass at the same time. So, like, there are moments where I'm like, okay, like, I understand the passion, I understand the aggression. Let's not be reckless. There's that clip of the Senior Bowl where he throws a defensive end into Desmond Ritter's knee. And if Ritter had gotten hurt, then, that's Ritter's lifestyle right there. Like, he already declared he can't go back to college. So that's Ritter's career right there on the line. And so I need Penning to like dial it back and be smarter about it. I don't need him to like lose the aggression. It's great that you want to be mean, but you gotta dial it back. Like if you go into the NFL with these kind of things and have 20 penalties or whatever, more games and all that, that's a huge problem. Like, and it's not like Alex Leatherwood getting a bunch of false starts. It's a bunch of personal fouls, blocking the backs, illegal clipping, like all these 10, 15-yard penalties. Like that's a huge issue for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the penalty stuff is fair. I just talked about Tyler Smith, who had 16 penalties this year. So that's something that can be perceived as a negative. I definitely think when talking about Trevor Penning, it's something he has to get better at. But I also do think it's something that kind of can be coached out of him in the right system, right? Like that's one of the more correctable issues, as opposed to like, oh, well, I just don't think his anchor is very good, right? Or some of the other things we talked about with guys that are, lower on the list. So for me, I had him at 5. You guys have him also in that range as well. So for me, that's kind of why Trevor Penning still made it. I think the tough sell for me with Trevor Penning is that you pretty much have to take him in the first round. And then as this is related to the Chargers, like, no, like that's just, it's just a really hard sell in that regard. Cause he's like I think he could theoretically play from day one, but I don't think he'd be very like good at it. I think it would take him a while to get in that kind of groove. So for me, I think he's OT4 and, or OT5, he goes to the right system and, a first round pick could very well be worth it for him, for the team that gets him. But it's just very hard to like see him fitting in here as opposed to, some of the other skill positions the Chargers really need and could stack up on.
Yeah, definitely not into the idea of spending a first round pick on him unless like all the edge rushers and corners are off the board at that point. Like then like I can talk myself into that. But like Alex was saying, I do agree. Like size, athleticism, like there aren't many concerns for me there. It really is just like the penalties and the mentality. So that being said, let's get to this upper echelon. I have a big gap between these players. So for example, Trevor Penning right now has a 6.53 grade for me. And Charles Cross, my number 3 offensive tackle, has a 7.06 grade. So just to kind of highlight where I'm at with this group. So obviously Charles Cross out of Mississippi State. I have him at 3. And then I have Evan Neal at 2. I have Neal and Cross very close. I have Neal at a 7.08. And then I have Ikem Ekwonu, Icky, for those who are paying attention. At number 1, I have him as OT1. He's a 7.26 for me. I think Charles Cross is kind of where I want to highlight here because for whatever reason, there are a lot of concerns on social media about his play strength, about his weight. Somebody told me that they think he weighs like 260 pounds, which I think is absurd. And watched videos with him training with Duke, and man is like pumping out like 20 pull-ups and he's doing all the snatches stuff. And like, Rashawn Slater was Duke's guy, right? Like for any video that Duke would put up of offensive linemen doing drills or lifting, it was always Slater. This year, it's always Cross. Like he is training with Evan Neal. He is training with Trevor Penning. But every time that Duke posts a video, it's always of Charles Cross. And so not that that's like the end all be all. Like I do think that there are some concerns with Charles Cross. I think lowering a player because of scheme is bullshit, but he has like blocked like 10 running plays a game because he plays for Mike Leach. Like there's just not a ton of reps in terms of the run blocking. And that shows. I do think he is an explosive athlete. I think he is a fluid mover. And frankly, I don't see any of the anchor concerns. I don't see any of the strength concerns that people are talking about on social media. For me, for my money, Charles Cross is the best pass blocking tackle of this group. I know it's kind of a common take, but I do think that there is a lot to like there. He's started for 2 years at Mississippi State. He's a very young player. He redshirted in 2019. But he made a huge jump up for Mississippi State in terms of pressures allowed. He allowed 44 pressures in 2020 as a redshirt freshman, and then this year just 16. So you look at sitting in college and that's a lot, but then look at him allowing 16 pressures on like 780 snaps or whatever which is by far the most of any of these guys. So I think you look at the traits that he displays. I think you look at the pass blocking technique and really like who he's training with and him being the guy for who he's training with. There's a lot to like for me and for Charles Cross. And so that's why he's 3. If for whatever reason he falls past 10, the Chargers have to do everything possible to trade up and get him and slate him next to Rashawn Slater, because I think that would be highway robbery. He should absolutely be a top 10 pick.
Yeah, Charles Cross is awesome. And again, the questions about him with the power, with the anchor, do I think he's as good as some of the other guys, the 2 ahead of him, in my opinion? No. But I was just surprised to watch him versus like Alabama after hearing those concerns and just see the anchor and power behind him. When I heard he just wasn't that kind of guy. I also think, and I think Ben Fennell just posted it yesterday, so he kind of beat me to it. I love that he recovers so well. Like,
yes,
the best tackles like Rashawn Slater, they have a plan B. So it's like, even though the initial rep might have been lost, they do something to make it a draw in the end. So I think him, like, that really, really stands out to me. And he's just so athletic, so great in pass pro. He shut down DeMarvin Leal, who's not like a top line edge rusher by any means. Leal kept trying like 4 spin moves against him for some reason. I don't know why, but he
man had him in hell, dude.
Oh yeah, no, seriously. It was a really good game from him. So I wish he would, like, the knocks on him aren't even all that much. I think it's just the more you get exposed to the run game. I don't know if I'd say he's as athletic as Penei Sewell, but he can get in space like him. The difference is Sewell was a freak who could also connect on those plays as well. So
Yeah.
I'd like to see Charles Cross connect a little bit more on those plays. But overall, I really like him. And yeah, there's just such a big difference between him and the guys behind him. He's just such a great pass protector. If he starts falling into that range, because if the Eagles stay in their spot and don't trade for Russell Wilson, they're not going to be taking a tackle, I would assume. So, like, that's kind of the area. If he starts going right before, if he starts falling right to where the Eagles are going to go, I guess you could wait for him too. But like, I would really consider him, because at that point, he'd probably be the best player on the board.
Yeah. Don't say Russell Wilson. I don't want you to jinx it. All right. Howie already sent it in. It's just going to take a couple months for it to happen. But no, I think, well, I guess I'll get straight to my 3-1 here, and then we can kind of discuss it. But I do have Ikem Ekwonu at number 3, Evan Neal at number 2, and I do have Charles Cross at number 1. So I sort of agree with Steven here. A little bit of an upset. We didn't plan any of this. But yeah, I think what separated him from Neal for me was like what Steven said, which is just his mobility, his athleticism, and like Tyler said, his ability to kind of like lose a rep and then still be in the play. I thought was really impressive too. I think Neal is like kind of a slam dunk like bet. He's going to be awesome like at the same time. But I do think the differentiator for me was a little bit the mobility of Cross versus Neal. I think is a little bit more of a statue, which isn't like a bad thing, especially if you're a really good blocker, both in the run game and the pass game. But that is something that is a little bit concerning for me at the next level, and kind of why I decided to separate the two a little bit. Also love Ekwonu as well. So for me, after those top 3 guys is when we talked about the perceived drop off. But yeah, that was kind of my top 3.
That's awesome. What a surprise. I did not expect that for sure. That's really, really cool. We didn't get to talk about Ekwonu yet. And he's not my number 1. We'll all have different number 1. So I do want to talk about Ekwonu here then, because boy, like when I watch all 22, I usually take timestamps while I watch the all 22 for either like a really positive play or a really negative play. So if I have to go back and do a film study, I can show something, and I always take note of their sacks and everything.
Very smart.
This is the only time I've ever done this with Ikem Ekwonu versus UNC. I didn't do a time stamp. I didn't do a time stamp for the game. I did a time period. I've never done that where it was between like 15 minutes to 18 minutes of the game. It was just nothing but highlights. There was like every 15 seconds, there was a highlight play. The dude, like, and I kind of make myself laugh with my notes. So I wrote like howitzer with legs, angry hippo. Like I wrote these things. Like you can't help, like, I mean this honestly when I say that the best prospects to me are the ones that make you Jay Jonas at Jameson laugh while you're watching. The ones that just make you chuckle and go, oh my gosh, oh my, like that's it. What a play, this and that. It's he does have some issues, and I could see why you'd have Cross ahead of him, Alex, because like I said, I think like the pass pro is more important than run blocking. But shit, dude. Like Iquanu in the open field, like it is. You can talk about him, Steven.
Yeah.
It was a joy to watch him. I'll say that.
So, you have Neil as number 1, then, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so I think Neil and Iquanu and Cross are all very close. I think it's a very similar conversation to like the receivers, right? It kind of just depends on your flavor. It being the best pass blocker in terms of Cross, I think that's safe. I think Iquanu is the best run blocker that I have ever graded. Like his run blocking is so good. And then I think Evan Neal is kind of a bit of both. Like I definitely think that there are a little bit of bend issues with Evan Neal, but he's a fantastic player and he's on Feldman's freak list. If you've seen the video on Twitter of him split squat jumping like a 50-inch box or whatever on Twitter from last year.
That was him?
That was him, man. So he's going to test like a freak at the combine. I am a little concerned about his weight. Not in the sense of Daniel Faalele or Mekhi Becton, but like I wish he could get down in like the 340 range as opposed to the 350 range. Just be that much more of an athlete. But I'm going to throw this out there because I generally hate player comparisons because I don't like I'm not super familiar with like everybody. Like I'm not gonna throw a Lane Johnson tag at Bernard Raimann just because he's white and because he's gonna be a right.
Are you gonna say Trent Williams?
No, I'm gonna say Jason Peters for Ike Ekwonu.
Oh, okay.
The way that Ekwonu moves and the way that Jason Peters moves are so similar to me. And I mean, we don't have college offensive tackle take from Jason Peters, but I think athletically they're just so similar, and the way that they run block, it really gave me strong Jason Peters vibes, and that's my comparison. That's like one of the few that I'll throw out here. But I love Ike Ekwonu, man, and I think that there are definitely concerns in terms of a pass protector. He ended up, let me make sure I have this right. He ended up 13th on our composite ranking list that Tyler compiled. So, the pressures aren't great. Penalties aren't great, but I think those are correctable issues. It's not like he has an anchor issue. It's not like he has pad level issue. It's more of just hand placement technique, and he can improve in that. But he is by far the best run blocker that I have graded over the last 3 years. And that includes Tevin Jenkins, that includes Trevor Penning, that includes Sam Cosmi, who was a big fan of in that regard. And so I love Icky, man. Icky is a fantastic player to me.
Yeah, he kind of moves like Jason Peters 10 years ago. Not
Jason Peters from the
most recent episode of Jason Peters. But yeah, no, I completely agree. It like the most underrated thing I think about him is just the fact that he is that size, and we can talk about like him even cut down size and all that, but like the fact that he's that big and can get to the second level frequently as he does is just insane to me. And in addition to being this like guy that can move just side to side in the run game, and almost run sideline to sideline is just like that part of it's nuts.
Yeah, he's a fantastic. It's too much fun. Picking between my top two was very, very difficult. And I'll get into that. So at number three, I do have Charles Cross of Mississippi State. At number two, Ike Ekwonu. And for number one for me is Evan Neal from Alabama. As you talked about in the composite rankings, with those guys being a little bit lower, Neal just checking that box for me and being the best of these three there, the composite rankings does make me feel good. This is a guy who, this is really his first season as a left tackle. In 2019, starting left guard. 2020, right tackle. And 2021, you finally get to be, the starting left tackle. And man, like, I really like watching this guy quite a bit. And I'll start with the negative first. The thing I thought was the most negative, I guess, from him was that tendency to lunge in the run game, and that edge rushers were able to take advantage of it. And so the reason he's my number one, and this is a bit of projection here, is because when I finally listened to Duke and Brandon talk about the offensive lineman and Evan Neal, they specifically referenced that was his biggest issue. And Duke basically came out and said, we've taken care of that. And now, to me, I have to believe him because of what he did with Rashawn Slater and because he kind of knows what he's doing. Sure, he's going to sell his guys. But to me, if that's my number one issue with him, and they have identified that and solved that, then I feel very comfortable putting him at number one. There are a couple of issues, with stunt ID. I think he got better as the year went on. I think earlier in the year, he struggled just a little bit as the year went on because it was his first year as a true left tackle the whole year. I think he got a lot better. Of the sacks that he allowed, there was one earlier in the year. I forget who it was against. It was like a 6-7 second play, but the quarterback held onto it for a long time, and then he gave up the sack. I don't really count that against him. And so the only real sack that he allowed all year was the final play of the college football season, which is so annoying that he made it all the way to the end. And it was literally the last game of the college football championship where he just overset a bit. The edge rusher, I think, split the guard and kneel, and he gave up a sack. So to me, the powerful drive that he has from his hips, his powerful hands, him being surprisingly nimble. I think generally he's rarely out of place, a strong whistle to whistle guy. I think he's better at moving to the second level forward than left to right when in the run game. So I think that, like some of the movement issues, maybe even weight, are a bit concerning, but I just think he does everything so well. And if the one weakness was identified, I'm sold on him. And just watching him play, there's a couple of times where an edge rusher or somebody will have their hands on him, and Neil is mostly winning the rep, and then he'll just take his hand and do this to the defender's arms, and the defender just goes horizontal in the pass rush rep. It's like, whoa. I mean, he's just, and the last thing is that I guess during the training with Duke is like, apparently Evan Neal has no chill, and he has to have Evan Neal calm down, like not calm down, but take that edge off. Apparently he's just playing with this intense edge. So the numbers check out, the frame, the program, working with Duke, the edge, all that really checks out for me. So it feels sort of safe to go Evan Neal. I could see why any of the other two guys would be ahead of him, but to me, I feel the most comfortable with him at number one. But all three guys are fantastic.
They really are, and I like that we had each a different number one. I was
Wouldn't have
not
guessed.
expecting that. Evan Neal, I think, is a fantastic player. I think he probably should be the number one pick just because of who is picking there and what they need. I think I'll probably have Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeau probably rated a little bit higher than him. Maybe Kyle Hamilton as well. We'll see how that one pans out. But, I think Evan Neal is safe. I think he is the best balance of the two. And I've seen some Tristan Wirfs comparisons out there for Evan Neal, and I honestly don't hate that. Like I said, normally I do hate player comparisons, but I do see a lot of Tristan Wirfs there. I think he's probably a little bit bigger and stronger than Wirfs, which is kind of crazy to say. But, I mean, Evan Neal is really, really good. And I think if you watch both of their games against Georgia, I think you see a little bit of improvement in the second one. I know he gave up the sack, but I think he played better in the college football playoff against Georgia than he did in the SEC championship game. And so I think that kind of shows where he's at too. So he's somebody that I think is a really quality tackle prospect for sure. Let's talk about some players that we like outside of the top 10 or some just misses for me. I think, somebody in the chat had a question about Kenyon Green earlier. I think Kenyon Green is pretty firmly a guard. I think that's where he played his best. That's where he started most of the seasons and most of the games for Texas A&M. Really, really like the player, but I think he is a guard. The tough one for me was Sean Ryan from UCLA. Plays left tackle. I think he has good tape, not great tape. And I think you just look at his frame and just kind of the lack of athleticism. I think he is a guard convert for me. I haven't fully decided that one yet, but he does have good tape. I thought he played pretty well against Kayvon Thibodeau again in Oregon. UCLA though, please, don't ever block edge rushers with your tight ends. That was just what are you doing? But Sean Ryan was a little tough for me to place, and we'll see how he tests. He's another guy that I think needs to probably drop some weight, but we'll see. That's kind of the guy I wanted to mention here.
Yeah, I have not watched him, so I couldn't say much about him. I am back and forth with Cordell Volson, a guy that he's number one in our composite rankings, but
from North Dakota State.
Yeah. So I mean, like Penning Light, I guess he checks a lot of the boxes. So he dominates a lot of his competition. Statistically, he performed well. He has that tenacity. He's strong hands, good strength, and anchor. To me, it's just I see a guy. I hate watching tackles block horizontally and lead with your head and shoulders into run blocks on the outside, which is that problem that Ekwonu, fixed and admitted that he had fixed. A guy that I didn't think he was all that light, but there's a lot of good there. So him, Kellen Deesh from Arizona State, just a kind of an average set of traits guy that, I think could be good. I do have concerns that he played at Texas A&M, or he barely played at Texas A&M, Then he transferred to Arizona State, and then he still barely played in that first year, and then finally started that second year. I don't know how often guys have to wait again and then play that second year. So, I'm not in love with a lot of these guys out here. We already talked about Rasheed Walker. Spencer Burford is probably going to be a guard. So that's kind of all I got for the guys outside the top 10.
Yeah, as far as guys outside the top 10, Bernard Raimann, hope it works out for you, buddy, in the NFL.
I hear he's good.
I heard he's good. I'll actually mention his teammate, Luke Gedke. I think he's kind of an interesting one that can kind of, either have that offensive tackle guard flexibility. A lot of people see him as a guard potentially in the NFL. Had kind of missed a lot of 2020 with an injury, came back for 2021, but then when he got invited to the Senior Bowl, got hurt again, unfortunately. So the thing that really kept him out of my top 10 was injury concerns, as well as like kind of clarification on what a lot of people see his position as. But there's I do think a decent amount of potential there. And I did have a to where and he was outside of the top 10, but is one of those honorable mentions. I feel just kind of very technical, does things well, but also didn't impress at the Senior Bowl and doesn't necessarily have like that sexy offensive tackle appeal, just sort of like good. So that's kind of why he ended up on the outside looking in for me. But I don't think by any means that he, I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up having a good career as well. Like he was one of those guys that can develop pretty quickly into what some people envision him as. So those were some of my honorable and dishonorable mention for Bernard Raimann.
I mean, I totally get it, but I think Braxton Jones from Southern Utah, I think, is an interesting one. Actually grew up like 2 minutes from my house, which is kind of crazy. Went to Murray High School in Utah. So there's some intrigue there. I haven't been able to watch any of his all 22 or anything like that. I thought he played okay at the Senior Bowl. I thought that of like the lower end of the spectrum tackles, I thought he probably was the better one there in terms of like him versus Spencer Burford or the one from North Dakota, not North Dakota State. I forget his name. That had like the bright green helmet. Tyler, I don't know if
well, let's go.
Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. So I'm curious to watch him. I'll get Rasheed Walker 2020 on my docket as well. We'll kind of see how that one pans out. But yeah, I mean, the tackle class thins out early, and then of course got to shout out my guy Bam Olaseni. Sorry,
I was gonna ask you about him.
Yeah. So Bam Olaseni is somebody that I think is a very intriguing day 3 candidate. He definitely exceeded expectations. I had a conversation with Brentley Weissman about him and his performance at the Shrine Bowl. He thought that Bam did not do very well at the Shrine Bowl, but that's not the reports that I heard from other people. So I'm curious there. He's only basically got 1 year of tape. He, like Raimann, was a very late start. He's from London. If you can imagine a 6'8" behemoth human being playing soccer, that was him in middle school and high school. And then his soccer coach was like, hey, you're kind of too big for soccer. Maybe go play football in America. And so he did it. He only had 1 year. They tried to start him in 2019. His first game was against Joe Tryon. It did not go well. And he was a backup in 2020, had some weight issues. And then this year started the whole season. And honestly, like I said, exceeded expectations. He's got a massive, massive wingspan. I think the highest that the NFL Combine will have, except he didn't get an invite, which I think is bullshit. And he is 6'8". So he's kind of like that Daniel Faalele size, kind of weight, speed, length thing. But as a day 3 target, I think there's some intrigue. Not for the Chargers. Don't think he's a scheme fit. Much more of a power scheme blocker, but had to mention him.
Then I'll mention one more guy then. Well, 2 things. One, I'll mention Spencer Burford just one more time because Cameron Thomas had 77 pressures on the year, and he had 4 more pressures in every single game the entire year this year, except for that game against UTSA where he had 0. And part of that is because of Burford. So that is a game to check out. And then I do have to mention a guy that I interviewed, Donovan Jennings. I was surprised. You look at some guys that are projected to be either priority free agents, undrafted free agents, maybe late picks. Donovan Jennings from South Florida. I was surprised at the way he could move. And the game that I watched was him against Cincinnati in 2020. That wasn't obviously 2021, but a lot of the same guys. And I was impressed with what I saw. So him, I didn't get a chance to do a whole lot of study. He does grade out well for Pro Football Focus. I just don't take a lot of stock into that. I think he was like top 12 on the tackles this year, but I was impressed with him, and he's a guy that can move. I think it's a guy that you could keep an eye on later on.
Where is he from?
South Florida.
Okay. That's right. All right. Well, that's our tackle class. Of course, went longer than I thought we would, but that's all in good fun. So, Alex, any final thoughts before we head out for the evening?
Yeah, no, I think Tyler mentioned Evan Neal and his mean streak, and he's probably gonna end up in Jacksonville, right? So I think you don't want to have too much of a mean streak down there, but compared to the last guy who was in Jacksonville, I think stealing a bike would be preferable to kicking and doing all the other stuff Urban Meyer did. So wish Evan Neal the best of luck in Jacksonville.
And well, at least he gets to play for Doug Peterson now, not the other guy.
Best coach ever. Okay, that's such an upgrade.
Oh God, he has Mike McCoy. Oh no, he's his quarterback coach. Never mind. Okay, not offensive coordinator. Otherwise, he's running draw plays all day. So never mind. My final thoughts: figure this out in free agency. But if you find a guy later on, I could see why some of these guys you could fall in love with some of these guys later on. I just don't like them at 17. So finding a guy in free agency, finding someone like a Max Mitchell later works out for me. Can't wait to talk about edge rushers.
Yes, so we're gonna do a mock free agency on Sunday, so that's gonna be a lot of fun. Hopefully, you guys tune in for that one. And then next Wednesday, a week from yesterday, we'll do edge rushers. So that will be great as well. And we are so close to getting some clarity, man. We're I think 19 days away from the start of free agency, which is gonna be a lot of fun. So that's going to do it for us, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our conversation on the offensive tackles. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Let us know in the comments. I know we had some strong feelings about Max Mitchell tonight in the chat, so that's always a lot of fun. If you're listening to the audio version of this, please leave a rating or review. We do always really appreciate that. Spotify, iTunes, wherever you find us. So like I said, that's going to do it. We'll see you guys next time.